The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Coming at you on game day for Leafs and Sens, Game 3. It's been almost 2,900 days since Ottawa has hosted a playoff game. They get to do that Thursday night at the Canadian Tire Centre. Meanwhile, the Toronto Maple Leafs hold down their first 2-0 series lead since 2002. I saw that stat floating around. That is insane. With Game 3 on the horizon for us, Siege, we should talk about both teams. We'll start with the Leafs. What has impressed you most as they've gotten themselves to this 2-0 series lead over the Ottawa Senators?
Well, first, a fun fact. I was in the building for the last game played here in Ottawa. In the playoffs, Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Final in 2017. A 2-1 win by the Senators to force Game 7. A lot of things have happened since then. 4 head coaches, a general manager, a new owner, dozens of new players. I'm pretty psyched for this game. I mean, as much as the series is at 2-0, I feel like it's going to have a pretty interesting atmosphere. We can get into the fan stuff a little bit, but even just the weight that these Sens fans have been through. As for what's impressed me from the Leafs, I think a couple things. This is definitely the most relaxed I've seen the Leafs in a playoff setting. For whatever reason, I don't have the answer exactly as to why that is. I think we can, guess that they've won 15 of their last 18 games going back to the regular season. Their goaltender Anthony Stolarz has won 10 straight starts. So they've found a gear that, has given them some confidence. I think that Craig Berube's had a calming effect of sorts, and they've just found their way through these games. But by no means do I get the sense that the Leafs feel they've played perfectly. And from where you and I sit up in the press box, I don't think it's looked perfect. They've certainly had stretches of both games where the Senators really had them, if not pinned in their own zone, pinned on their half of the ice, continually reloading and keeping the Leafs under pretty consistent pressure in their own end. The shot counter shows that. Really probably the biggest difference I can see is just how well Stolarz has played. And I think I should highlight him of all the individuals I might talk about to answer your question. I think, his first 2 playoff starts have been exactly what a team that has the ambitions the Leafs need. He's made some couple saves you would say he maybe shouldn't have. And he's stopped all the ones more or less that you would want him to. I mean, really, the 2 goals in Game 2 that got by him were both kind of what we call bad breaks. I mean, Linus Ullmark had some of that at his end, pucks going in off defensemen and, not just clear shots where, the goalie was beat by a player. So they seem everything's sort of as it's supposed to be right now. And that's kind of the job for Ottawa on a couple fronts. Obviously, on the simple terms, they just got to go win a game. They have to, I think, in doing so, maybe introduced a little seed of doubt that isn't there just yet with how Toronto's fared through those first 2.
A bunch of saves to keep his team in it through 2 games and a massive hit on Ridley Gregg after the net front battle to end all net front battles. I say that in jest, of course, but that back and forth between Ridley Gregg and Anthony Stolarz was something. I'm starting to be on the side that says that I don't understand why Ridley Gregg got a penalty in that instance, but I could be swayed the other way. And I know some Senators fans and even Travis Green on Wednesday a bit confused about that as well. What did you think of that net front battle?
Well, in isolation, I'm with you. Like in that play, how you can watch the clip a dozen times. It's hard to see, where Ridley Gregg did anything to rough Stolarz. I mean, obviously, he's made it a point to try to get under the hair of the Leafs to try to be a bit of a nuisance or be someone that they're aware of. He was, in and around the crease as players are instructed to do and all trying to do in the offensive zone, and Stolarz got a couple whacks before he leaned his shoulder into him and set him to the ice. I think in isolation, it makes no sense. To me, there's maybe a little bit of hockey being hockey in that moment. And at least whether it's a stated acknowledgement or a little wink, wink. There is a thought that Greg might have got away with one at the end of game one, sliding into Stolarz. So, that incident doesn't happen in isolation. By no means am I defending the officiating. I think we could get into whether the officials should do this in a game, but I think part of that was just everyone understanding that a couple things have gone on there. And I can't imagine if there's any kind of anything like that in the crease again with any players, but specifically if it's Stolarz and Greg in game 3 or game 4 or game 5, whatever, is to come here. I can't imagine that that's going to be an offsetting penalty the next time. I do feel like that was almost like, okay, guys, we know what you both are doing. You both have sort of crossed the line here. We're evening this up, and the next time it's one of you. And that's just sort of my best interpretation of what happened. Because you're right. Greg in that specific instance, it's not like he punched the Leafs goalie or did anything that typically earns you a roughing penalty, especially in the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't know. Just watching that over and over, I know he's trying to get his position. The players obviously are allowed to kind of do their thing in front of net, and I get goalies should have the right to kind of defend themselves in that moment, but dude is hacking and whacking. But I suspect it won't be the last time we see those two parties go at it. Just from moment one in this series, Anthony Stolarz has been pretty annoyed of a player who is becoming, I want to say public enemy number one, but I still think that might be reserved for Brady Tkachuk, considering all the boos and his name and the Brady sucks chants coming up. So it might be Tkachuk, then Greg, then Linus Ullmark with the chance that he's been getting too. Still, though, the fact that the Senators down 2-0, the fact that they've imposed themselves in that way. I would
say this.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you ask the fans would say Brady Tkachuk it would seem, just based on the chance you mentioned in both games. I think if you ask the Leafs players with true serum, it would be Ridley Gregg. And this goes over multiple games. There's the slap shot thing, but then even the sort of chicken wing hit he had on Austin Matthews that prompted a fight in a regular season game. Those are very much of the mind, like 100% that he intended to slide into Stolarz with 4 minutes left in game one. That's what Stolarz is reacting to, I think, specifically, is that idea that he was going in there with the potential to hurt him. So that's I think the bad blood the Leafs have individually is probably for that player more than Tkachuk. And, look, there's still time for Brady Tkachuk to rise the power rankings of hate here because, while he did score a goal got a bounce in game 2, I still feel like he's certainly got another level individually. I know he missed a lot of time down the stretch. I mean, maybe he's not at 100% in the series, but I think he's still got a chance to make his sort of announce his arrival in a more meaningful way, I would call it. As the series goes on. And so, it seems like the Leafs are largely trying to stay out of it, which I realize sounds antithetical to what we're talking about because of the Stolarz incident. But beyond that, you've really, it seems like there's a real focus on the Leafs side to try to keep it between the whistles, to deliver legal body checks, but maybe not face wash and engage as much in some of the scrums and some of the things. I think the Senators are very comfortable playing the game that way, trying to get the Leafs' attention, and frankly, they've done it. That's how you see Stolarz do that. Now, in that instance, I think if you're Ottawa, you're hoping that knocks him off his game entirely. You're almost hoping that just he loses his focus as a result of something like that. And I didn't see a lot of evidence of that in his performance afterwards. But series are an investment too. Like that's where I'm saying this thing happened in game 2 because of this thing in game 1. Well, something's going to happen in game 3, and I think we could probably trace the lines backwards. So. I think the Senators are going to double down on this. I don't know if you call it agitating or whatever, but clearly they're trying to be a pain in the ass. And Greg in particular has achieved that aim so far when it comes to how the Leafs feel about him.
It's all about being that pain in the ass and just not stepping over that line where you return to penalty trouble, because that burned them in game 1. And the one time they were on the penalty kill in game 2, they got scored on. And we could segue into the Leafs power play like this. One stat that buzzed around, you tweeted about it, our friend Chris Stevenson tweeted about it, and everyone knows it now. The Leafs have needed 38 seconds to score all 4 of their power play goals in this series. How did this Leafs team become so effective with the quick strikes with the man advantage?
Well, they are a good face-off team, and obviously to have that kind of stat, you're generally winning the draw because you're scoring pretty quickly after it. I don't know that they've found. I don't think it's a matter of just like plays they've drawn up that have been executed perfectly. I think that they certainly allow a lot of freelance with their top unit. I think of the goal William Nylander scored. That isn't one that Mark Savard had diagrammed at the bench prior to them going out there, but. This is one of the more remarkable stats I can ever remember seeing. I wouldn't even know how to fact check whether it's happened, if it's happened, but to see a team score 4 power play goals and not even average 10 seconds on each of those power plays between when the penalty was called and when they scored. I mean, in a weird way, you might just look at the numbers and be like, wow, the Sens got to fix their PK. And I'm not saying they don't, but they almost haven't been on the ice enough to even judge like what's wrong with the PK. I mean, really, they're losing a faceoff and then something's happening and the puck's going in the net. It's not necessarily a matter where the Leafs have, I think, uncovered anything. They have pretty gifted shooters and they've put the puck in pretty quickly. So, I think it actually is sort of challenging probably on the special team side for the Sens because, if you had 90-second power plays before a goal and you could really break down, maybe what the Leafs are seeing, how they're using their formation, you could get into a little bit more of that sort of cat and mouse. Whereas I do feel like other than maybe bearing down on face-off plays and trying to win more draws, in that situation, which obviously you're doing anyway, I don't know that there's a fix to the quick strikes. And quite honestly, I think it's going to be tough for them to keep up. I mean, just scoring 4 power play goals in 2 games in the playoffs for the Leafs is probably cause for celebration given some of their past. And that's one thing I neglected to mention in your initial question about, what you would like on the Toronto end of the series so far. You obviously like that because when you're scoring on the power play, it's your big guys getting points. I just think that takes some of the pressure off them. And obviously that's helped them get 2 wins here to open the series.
Yeah. I'll say this with the PK as, I thought that would be a concern heading into this series. I didn't expect it to be a concern in this way where they're not on long enough for us to really look at the formation and see what issues. I mean, that's not completely true. They've had those moments, but it's just the Leafs have just converted those chances on the power play when they've had those opportunities. I'll say this too about the Ottawa Senators, the fact that they've been able to stay out of the penalty box in game 2. I know they've liked their game at 5-on-5. Brady Tkachuk gets a goal. Adam Gaudette gets a goal. I really think game 2, when you really look back at it, they still have a chance to win this series, but I really thought there was a big opportunity for them to win it and take that game away, that power away from the Toronto Maple Leafs heading into game 3. I think the mountain that's there for them already, it was tough for them to climb. It's going to be a little tougher even if they have those games at home. And we could touch on the fans in a moment, but I think just being down 2-0 for this group that's still learning about how to play in those playoff games is a bit tougher for them to overcome versus a 1-1 series tie where you've planted a seed of doubt in the Toronto Maple Leafs heads by winning a game in their own barn.
Well, I will say this. I mean, I think there's probably a world if I was someone of influence in the Senators dressing room. I mean, there's still an opportunity to really embrace an underdog mentality, to start leaning into the fact that, okay, yeah, like it's tough when you look at it as you got to win 4 of the next 5 to move on. That sounds daunting, right? It's a difficult task, but the teams that I've seen have the most success from these situations, including Edmonton last year. I know they ultimately lost game 7 to Florida, but very few people gave them a chance to make that Stanley Cup final anything when they were down in a 3-0 hole. They started about, let's force them to go home and have to play an extra game and the flight. And I think the teams that can stay in the moment, that can maybe, almost just face the facts that, hey, look, we're getting awfully closer to the end of the season, but just play free, play your best game. What the Senators clearly need to do is get off to a better start. And, we can talk about how it was great that they came back, and it was. I mean, they had a great second period. The third was a little more locked down, but look, full credit. They tied the game. But what we've seen in the first few nights here of the playoffs is teams have come back. In the game 1 of the Montreal-Washington series, the Habs came back but lost in overtime, right? Edmonton came back from 4 goals down to LA in their game 1 and lost that game still, you expend so much energy that even just getting back and tying is, in a weird way, it almost feels like a victory, but if you still lose the game, you're where you started. And so I think the combination of being at home in game 3 for the Sens, where they are at in the series, just sort of the desperation that's going to put into them. Even I think it will be just an extra level of whatever fire in their belly, just knowing, their season is starting to dangle in front of them if they don't take care of business. They being on home ice is, Brady Tkachuk wisely leaned into that, like right out of the gate, post game 2. Like he's asked about the game and he just, smartly mentions that they're not panicking, but also kind of urging the fans for what they need. I think it's got to be a better start. That includes some better goaltending. Linus Ullmark isn't just another goalie in the playoffs. He's someone the Sens, acquired and signed to a pretty big contract. I mean, no matter what happens this playoff year, and I know to some degree the Senators are on house money this playoffs because it has been 8 years and they do have young players and we all recognize that they're getting experience here that they can use down the line. He's still got to assert himself, I think, as someone who can be that difference maker for them, even if it's the next time around. Like, even if, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying this series is over. I really want to watch game 3 before anything sounds too definitive. But I'm just saying, even if Ottawa were to lose this series, I think how they lose it, how he performs can make a difference for him because he's the backbone of the team. He's meant to be, one of the leaders of that group. And so, if he can fight back and, see a few less pucks go behind him. I mean, I don't even know what he would take individually from game 2. Kind of a weird night for him. Didn't face almost any shots in the second period. If we're going to assign blame on the overtime goal, I'm not putting it on his shoulders. There was some breakdowns in front of him and a turnover that I know Drake Batherson owned when you guys spoke to him on the off day there between games. So, it's a team game, but I'm looking for a better start from Ottawa, and I'm definitely looking from a stronger, more composed game from Ullmark.
Speaking of overtime winner, did you have Max Domi as your OT pick? You're supposed to have OT picks for either side, jokingly. Did you have Max Domi as your OT pick for game 2?
I did not. We did it in the group chat. I think I picked, if I remember, I liked finding maybe the non-obvious guys because I do think quite often it is that. I think I had Steven Lorentz for the Leafs and Jake Sanderson, I believe I took for the Senators. Do you remember who you took? It all kind of went in a blur. But
I don't remember making a pick because as we were getting to the end of regulation, I just beeline for downstairs, so I didn't even get to chime in. In all seriousness, though, Max Domi, we know about the familial ties to the Battle of Ontario and with the Toronto Maple Leafs, thanks to his dad, Ty. Funny I say Ty with Ty. And he gets to add himself to the Battle of Ontario lore with that overtime winner. Travis Green mentioning when he was a member of the Leafs, he saw Max grow up as a kid and, seeing him obviously score on his own team, he won't like that, but obviously had a lot of nice things to say about Max Domi. What did you think of that moment?
I mean, really great for Max. Obviously, he had a tough season. He had 2 really, really long stretches without scoring a goal. And I know he's been primarily more of a playmaker. When he gets his offensive moments, they tend to be on assists rather than goals. But, you still meant to score. He had 8 goals this year. That was only his 8th ever Stanley Cup playoff goal, for a guy into his 10th season. He's not had, I think that it's probably not even close. That's the biggest goal of his career. He wasn't in any mood to sort of go down that road and indulging those questions. Like, he was very much in deflection mode after that. But I mean, let's say for him what he didn't say himself. I mean, that's special stuff. If you grew up, I think, for any player to score any overtime goal in the playoffs is a big deal. Alex Ovechkin just scored in recent days here, his first ever Stanley Cup playoff overtime goal. Like, everyone who saw that stat probably go, like, how is that possible? I mean, you just don't get a lot of opportunities. Even for the Leafs end, that was the first time the fans had a chance to cheer in Scotiabank Arena / Air Canada Center, an overtime winner in the playoffs for the Leafs since Tyler Bozak scored in Game 3 in 2017 against Washington. Jeez. So, even the team like the Leafs, who have played a lot of playoff games in that time, it's not as though there's this long record of history of them scoring overtime winners in that building in recent history. I mean, so it's a big moment for any player who does it. I think Domi's ties make it a big deal. I think the fact that he struggled offensively this year and gets to have that moment is pretty special. There's a little serendipity here, by the way. I did a little sleuthing last night, after that game ended, and Max Domi was mic'd up.
Yes.
NHL Productions mics up players. The way it works at this stage of the playoffs is the request comes into the team before the series about a player to be mic'd up. Obviously, the team discusses with the player if he's comfortable with that, and then they decide what game. Like, it's not like there's a player even mic'd up every game. The initial request for Domi was to be mic'd up game 1. He said he'd rather have it for game 2. And I've yet to see the footage, but I bet there's going to be pretty cool footage of him because you're going to audibly be able to hear, him celebrating that goal. We'll see if what he might have said. It might just be inaudible yelling, which is sometimes the case when you have one of those ones, but obviously will add to the moment. And I guess maybe Max, I wasn't picking him, and I don't think a lot of people would have been picking him to score that goal. Maybe he had some inclination that he had a moment because he got his mic switched where they had all that extra footage of him from game 1 of the series to game 2 instead.
Yeah, we'll definitely see that footage make the rounds when it comes time. One more thing as we look ahead to Game 3. The game is in Ottawa. The Senators have home ice advantage, but what will that crowd look like? We know at the Canadian Tire Centre, it can be split between Sens fans and Leafs fans. We know the Sens have tried as much as they could to keep Leaf fans out of that building, but what do you think it'll look like when the puck drops?
I don't know. And I would normally not care about this sort of thing. Like, in a lot of cases, I think it's sort of like whatever. I mean, there's fans at every game. But I do think in this instance, with the teams being so close, with there sort of being that history, as you mentioned, like the Leafs played a game in Ottawa January 25th. Like, it was a takeover. I think it was more than half Leafs fans that night. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's a game in recent memory. If you go back over many before that, it's kind of been the vibe. I think it's going to be tough. I don't think they're going to be at 50% or anywhere close. I really believe the Sens' efforts to get the tickets into the season ticket holders' hands. They had that group of tickets that they released that can't be resold. So, I mean, you're selling them to people who you presume are Sens fans to begin with, and they have to give them to someone that can actually transfer them on like StubHub or something like that. I think it's going to be more than we've seen in the past. It tilted in Ottawa's favor, but look, there's going to be people in the building. Even as we're recording this right now, I was looking at StubHub before we came on here. There's still tickets for sale. So, I mean, it's reasonable to believe some people that might be inclined to wear a white and blue jersey to a game might be looking at those tickets and just saying, yeah, that's going to cost me 2 paychecks, but here we go. I do think it adds something. This is part of why we got jazzed up about the series, right? Part of it is, it's two teams. It's an up and coming team versus a team that's been in the playoffs. It's this, it's that. I mean, part of it is that these are two teams that the fans on both sides can drive. I mean, I saw some Sens sweaters, I got to say, in games 1 and 2 at Scotiabank. Not enough to make any audible difference in the game. But it's this is stirring emotions right across the province. And, I think that more than if this was a series, like if Toronto was playing Florida, just for example, and they've played both Tampa and Florida in recent years. Like, of course, there's Leaf fans at those games on the road too, but I feel like Leaf fans might be more inclined to try to make some kind of statement by being at this game, but it seems like the Sens fans are doing everything they can to keep them out. So that's a long way of saying I am fascinated to see what it looks like, what it feels like. Would not surprise me if we get something approximating dueling chants at times, which I think is actually, it makes sports, it's beautiful and chaotic. I think it's going to be a great night. I'm so pumped for this game just to see how it all plays out. And, even down 0-2 in a series, even though that might mitigate just a little bit some of the excitement. I mean, Sens fans have waited so long for a night like this. I just have to think they're going to let it rip. I think it's going to be a fantastic atmosphere in the CTC.
I anticipate Sens fans will make themselves heard. Again, the first time in how many years? 8 years since they got to host a playoff game. But I am also counting down the moments until we hear a Brady sucks chant in his own building. It's going to happen, and it's going to feel very weird because the truth of the matter is, as much as the Senators are trying to keep Leafs fans out of their building, there's no way they could do that at 100%. And I just know for those players who find it annoying that there can be those takeovers in a playoff game like that, knowing that that's going to happen, it will feel weird for those Sens players for sure.
Yeah, I mean, but look, you can find some extra motivation there in trying to shut them up. Even Patrick O'Leary, I know he referenced this before, but said when in the old Sens rivalry days, they used to joke like, hey, we got to score a goal to take them out of it in our own building. But, that sort of thing is true, right? Like Ottawa hasn't had a lead in this series yet. Ottawa's in the series. They've had certain like stretches. They've definitely, it's not like domination one side over the other, even though it's 2-0, but they need to, I think they need to grab hold of something. That's what I'm saying. Like if they get a lead, if they can obviously win a game, like all these things all of a sudden make this look a little more compelling or a little more like, oh, not exactly what we thought that you feel sometimes when one team has won the first two games. So, I mean, what a massive night. Like I love everything riding on it. It's like what you're saying, like the battle in the stands, the battle on the ice, I expect to be intense, and the stakes are huge because, if they go down 3-0, of course they can come back. It's happened a handful of times in history, but I don't think that anybody would be expecting them to. But if they make it 2-1, brand new ball game, brother.
Oh yeah. Look, I know it's 2-0. A lot of us in this industry, I don't think would complain too much if the Senators found a way to make a game of it and we were talking about this series going 6 or 7. I think just for the stakes attached to the series, the history with those two teams, this ending in 4 or 5 would feel like a bit of a letdown. Like it'd be fun to see the Senators step up and really make a series of it. And we're talking again about something going to 6 or 7. We have to see the Senators do their part, of course, but it would be fascinating to see it play out that way.
Yeah, and look, there's reason for hope there. That Stützle looked really good, in particular in game 2. He had a good game 1 too, but it looked pretty dangerous to me in that game. As I say, like I think you want a little more from Tkachuk, but he's got it to give. You just need a few more guys to find another level, and obviously, look at some of the players that have scored for the Leafs. You had the Oliver Ekman-Larsson goal. Morgan Riley's got 2. He's an offensive defenseman, but you don't expect him to score every night. It's been some greasier ones, right? And maybe there's someone in the Sens lineup that can pop one of those in. I mean, this is why these things start to feel the way they do, because it just goes back and forth. And you're like, can they counter? Can they find another level? I mean, I just can't imagine that Ottawa isn't going to be better in this game. And I think that there's a world, though, which is maybe where you get in a little scary territory if you're a Sens fan, is there's a world that Toronto gets better too. I mean, there's a universe here where they actually control the puck for longer stretches, or where the game looks a little different than, especially in game 2, where in the second period it was one team really taking it to the other.
And there's a universe as well where Austin Matthews scores his first and adds to it on the score sheet as well. Only 3 assists through 2 games. The fact that the Leafs are up 2-0 in the series and their best player has yet to score in that is a big storyline as well.
Yeah, Tavares had a breakaway too in the third period of game 2 and missed. There's a few guys still. Like Mitch Marner had his moment in game 1, obviously scored that overtime goal in the first, scored that breakaway goal in the first period, but I still think, he could still have something to say here. I mean, this is one thing I've seen in the playoffs so far, Julian, and I know we'll talk about some of the other series, is the game breakers have been pretty prominent so far. I mean, McKinnon's off to a great start in that Avalanche series. Scheifele's been really good for Winnipeg and getting them a 2-0 lead. The Leafs, bigger name guys, maybe we haven't had a signature performance. I mean, I'm missing the obvious by not mentioning Connor McDavid's game 1 at Edmonton, even with that being a loss, like the 4-point night, bringing them back from the cusp. I mean, game breakers are so important in the playoffs. And so, that's why I look to like a Stützle or, one of the Sens top offensive guys, needs to have a big night to will them back into this thing.
This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton has what you need to achieve your fitness goals, no matter why you got started. Whether you just want your cardio up, if you're going through a tough time in your life and you just want to be active, Peloton's the right place to start, I think. They've got 4-week strength building classes to running, indoor and outdoor workouts, and everything in between. Peloton will push you to achieve your goals. You can challenge yourself anywhere with Peloton's all-access membership, where you can work out where you need to, like at home, outdoors, and you can take your favorite classes to the gym with the app. It's backed by thousands of members whose lives were changed. Peloton has thousands of members whose lives were changed by the workouts experience and their community. And Peloton can help you get stronger with strength classes, workout generators, and personalized programs on the Peloton Tread and Strength Plus app. Find your push. Find your power with Peloton at onepeloton.ca. We should start to kind of go over some of the playoff series going around. Florida, Tampa on Thursday night as well. Vegas, Minnesota playing, Winnipeg and St. Louis. We've had some pretty good games to start off the Stanley Cup playoffs, I would think. You mentioned some of the games that happened on the Monday. I mean, the back and forth between Washington and Montreal and Connor McDavid doing his thing in game one. So much we can get into with that, but also looking ahead to these games on Thursday. I like how Vegas and Minnesota has been going. I like that Minnesota pushed back and didn't lie on the ground, and they made a series of it entering game three. Winnipeg has the 2-0 series lead as well. I like what's been happening in some of those series. And one more thing, too. I did not expect Andrei Vasilevsky to not look great against the Florida Panthers, but Matthew Tkachuk back in a big way for the Panthers.
Yeah, it's funny that the start of that series not coming till Tuesday, and obviously quite a bit of delayed behind the other series. Like, I wonder if that helped Florida. Usually you want the rest after a series to heal your wounds, but they were the rare team that was so wounded coming into the playoffs. I just wonder what maybe a couple extra days, how that might have helped them. Obviously that there was the big goal review by the Lightning early in that game, and leads to a power play because the review didn't overturn the goal, and then it's 3-1 pretty quickly in that game. It's I think the Battle of Florida though still got some juice on it, even with a 6-2 loss. Sometimes the one-sided scores, and Tampa, you've actually seen this if you look back in a couple of their cup runs. They had some sort of janky games in there that ended up in a funny way, and Vasilevsky in particular has bounced back pretty well throughout his career. I mean, he had such a good year this year. He's talked about some changes he's made to the way he plays that I think have kind of elevated him back into the rarefied era he's been in for a long time. And so, that one, we'll see. I mean, I'll be fair. I can't remember what I picked in Minnesota, Vegas for the SDPN bracket, but I do know that I had Vegas, and it wouldn't surprise me if I said 4 or 5, because that's definitely what I was thinking. I was thinking it would be a quick series. So, the Wild did well to even that up. And, the cool thing about the playoffs, I think, is, there's all kinds of stuff, but when a team goes down, it does add, like, you have to remember there's a certain amount of human nature here. Like, humans kind of, you give what you got on a given day, and it's hard to give more than that amount if you think about your effort on anything. And it just feels like when your team is backed into a corner a little bit more, when the stakes get to where, hey, if you lose, you're down 3-0 or you're down 2-0 going home, those teams really can muster a response and find a new level. And that's what we're kind of watching back and forth. And, I actually, on my travel day to Ottawa, bumped into an NHL referee. Won't name the person because was not meant to report this so much. But it's more, he was just saying like how, even like from where he sits as an official, like how amazing the first round is. And, you just observed from past years where he's worked, the way it gets tough to maintain that pace into the second round or through the second round into the third round. It doesn't mean that desperation isn't there, and the hockey can still be tremendous. But, right now we're seeing kind of the best everyone's got, and just throwing punches back and forth, and, pretty crazy, man. Like a week from now, more teams are going to be out. We're going to have less than half the league still playing games, any day now. I mean, that's how quickly this whole thing happens.
And we'll be there to cover all of it here on the CJ Show. So let's transition from the games on the ice to some news and notes from around the league and around the hockey world. Earlier this week, the sexual assault case involving Hockey Canada and 5 members of the 2018 World Junior team, that case getting underway, the trial getting underway earlier this week. We know with some reporting going around, we know Rick Westhead has been covering it, of course, at The Athletic. We have our team covering that. One story, one plot point that has made the rounds regarding this story, the list of witnesses who could be called to this trial involving players who are involved in the Stanley Cup playoffs. What do we know about that particular part of the story with this scandal?
Well, I mean, look, it's going to be an 8-week trial, potentially. That's how much time the court has put aside for it. So it's a trial that could extend right through to the Stanley Cup final, potentially, and beyond even. And, there's 7 players that are currently members of playoff teams that are on the list to potentially be called as witnesses. I think it's important to underline that just because you're called as a witness, you're not obviously implicated in the crime necessarily. Certain players on that list may have been, very close to some of the things that happened in that alleged incident, but some might have just been on the group text or might have been privy to other conversations that happened beforehand or afterwards that might be of interest to either side that's involved in trying this case. So, don't in any way want to implicate anything negative, but it does seem as though the court is of a mind that should those players be called, that they'll work with their work schedule, essentially, that they'll allow that testimony to be given over video and remotely versus potentially this situation that, at least seem possible that a player may have to fly into London in the middle of a playoff series, potentially to give that testimony. It does sound as though, it will be allowed to be given remotely. So, that will be, there's a lot of, for those that don't typically follow court cases, obviously there's a lot of elements of this. If you're, you're a hockey fan who's got interest here, it's that this is unusual. This is uncovered ground, I would say. And, the trial's just getting underway. And so we just have to let the legal process play out there in terms of that. But I mean, one thing I guess to be aware of is that at any given day now, one or more of those players that are playing some of the games these nights, might be testifying. And from my understanding, I know that there is some degree of a publication ban in place on this case, but I do believe once a player has been called to the stand and gives testimony, most of that testimony can be reported on by whether it's Katie Strang, Dan Robson, Rick Westhead, whoever else is down in London. So, we're gonna start to see this stuff, once they get into the portion of the trial where witnesses are being called.
Yep. And once we get those details, we'll continue to talk about that story as it develops here on the CJ Show. So we go from London to the Long Island, where earlier this week, Lou Lamoriello, it was announced he won't return as general manager of the New York Islanders after 7 seasons. They just missed the playoffs. What do we know about how the Islanders got to that point and who could be next to replace him?
Well, Lamoriello's contract was running out. You're talking about a man into his early 80s. I mean, what a tremendous run. I mean, I feel like you start there with the fact that he was a GM as long as he was, obviously built New Jersey teams that won multiple cups, had that stint in Toronto, finished out on Long Island. I mean, helped put the teams in place that went to back-to-back conference finals. I don't think anybody expected, 2020, 2021. Now, the last couple of years haven't been quite as kind, and they missed the playoffs and this season. And I do think ownership got to a point where they feel, some fresh air maybe needs to come through the front office. But, when you're talking with someone Lou Lamoriello's age, I don't think he was going to be the one to stop himself. But, someone had to make the decision to turn that over, and will be interesting to see where that organization goes. I reached out to some people that I thought could be interested in the job, who might get, be getting discussed for that. And there's kind of some varying opinions out there about what the Islanders are. I mean, there's one person told me they thought that they're basically the Penguins, but without the superstars, in terms of the project it might be to turn them around, because of where the organization is right now. But anyway, you shake it. It's a team that plays out of a new building, does have some established NHL players, great fan base. It's a very appealing job, and there's a pretty long list of guys, whether you want to mention, Jarmo Kekalainen, Marc Bergevin, maybe even Peter Chiarelli. I mean, there's GMs that have worked at other places that are available, like those guys. You've got some younger AGMs that have been probably positioning themselves, I guess, where they might get that kind of promotion. And Matthew Darche has been mentioned often in that role in Tampa as the AGM there. Maybe we'll throw Brandon Pridham out there, Leafs cap expert. Don't know if he is inclined to move on. He's been pretty adamant about wanting to remain near his hometown and try to help the Leafs win a cup. But, that search will get going. It's really just beginning now, being conducted by John Collins, who's a former senior league executive once upon a time, had a stint working in football and has, been a minority partner with the Islanders ownership group. So he's got deep connections in the industry. And, I didn't even mention Ken Holland is probably the primary name that, I think is going to, they'll see if there's a fit there, but, potentially there could be other jobs for Ken Holland. And, his stock is pretty high with the way things had ended in Edmonton, but the fact that, the Oilers nearly won a cup in one of his last days in that seat.
Yeah, I feel like it's a matter of time before Ken Holland comes back, more just with the way the GM carousel works, but also just with the resume attached to him. I feel like it's a matter of time, whether it's in New York or somewhere else. I think he's coming back this year.
What's interesting is that GMs, first of all, they tend to be employed longer than the average coach, right? Like the average lifespan, a career span of a GM with an organization tends to be longer than a head coach. GMs don't get recycled to nearly the same degree you see with coaches. Now Ken Holland, if he gets another job, would be onto his third team as a GM, obviously a long time in Detroit, and then that 5 years with the Oilers. But, experience is so important in that job. And I think, it can be a risk to turn over, even if it's someone who's young and is earning a lot of attention, with good reason, smart, all the attributes that would give a candidate a reason to be considered for a GM's job. It's, there's a lot of responsibility there. There's a lot to learn on the fly. And so, it's a tough spot. I feel like a team like the Islanders are going to be more inclined to go with some experience, just because of where they're at. There's pros and cons, and you have to get your experience somewhere, right? Ken Holland had to get a start. Now he came up in one organization and slowly added to, his portfolio, slowly added responsibilities, slowly gained the trust of the people he works with, learned more about the business, and ultimately ascended to the top job, hockey ops wise in that organization. I mean, that's one way to get it done. But it's a long way of saying I feel like there's only so many qualified managers out there that are still in the right age range that, have experience. There's really not that long of a list. It's certainly a much shorter list than the head coach candidates that might be available. And so, I think that puts someone like Ken Holland in real demand, especially if there's anyone else that ends up making a GM change. I mean, we don't have any indication of that. Obviously, Seattle's gone through here in recent days and moved Ron Francis up to the president's role and elevated Jason Botterill to their GM's job. But, in that case, they have their GM. But it doesn't seem like necessarily we're going to get any other changes. I mean, a little unclear in Buffalo, where they were pretty open at the locker cleanout day about Kevin Adams having meetings with Terry Pegula, the Sabres owner. But long way of saying, I'm with you. I think Ken Holland still wants to work. He's stayed around the game. He's done work for hockey ops this season. And, I would think he's going to get a job here at some point in the near future.
Speaking of Seattle, yes, Jason Botterill named GM for the Kraken. Dan Bylsma also won't return as head coach over there. He was only there for a season, rather fast for them to move on from Dan Bylsma. How did the Kraken get here?
It was a difficult season. I think that it's evidence of the expectations internally really rising, the pressure to deliver, the fact that, now they're 4 years into their existence as an organization and doesn't feel like they have a lot to show for it. They did have the one playoff appearance a couple years ago, but, it's it's unfair to even compare them to Vegas in any way, shape, or form. But obviously, it's been a different it's been a different start to their tenure, as I think anyone should have expected as a team. But there seemed like there was a lot of issues this year. That coaching staff didn't function on a level. Obviously, the team didn't win very many games, and so this is a pretty big set of changes. I think ownership in Seattle is loyal to Ron Francis, who's been there from the start. But they need to change some of their processes and I think give rise to some new ideas. So Jason Botterill gets a second kick as a GM. He had a time in Buffalo. I guess if you're trying to look at the happy side of this story, is a lot of people moved on from the Sabres and had success. I mean, Jason Botterill was pretty in demand himself after his time with the Penguins before he went to Buffalo. Didn't go quite as well there, but he gets a second crack at the job with far more, experience and know-how in terms of operating in that position. So yeah, and while he does so, he's going to get a clean slate to, be part of hiring a head coach. And so, we'll see where they land. I would think though, I talked about experience with front office people. I would imagine this is a job that's going to someone with experience behind the bench. And Dan Bylsma had that, but he was a long time out of the NHL, 7 years. And 7 years is a long time not to work in a league, and it just didn't go well there for him. And so change is constant. It seems certainly behind the bench. We've seen a lot of changes in those jobs around the league.
Okay, not to flip-flop back and forth, but we were at the Island, then we transitioned to Seattle. We got to go back to New York because Chris Drury remaining as New York GM for the Rangers. Just wondering now if we know anything about who could be his new head coach. We know Peter Laviolette is out the door. Who could replace him?
Well, it's a big decision. All this extension for Chris Drury tells you is that he has the ear of ownership. Jim Dolan likes him. Jim Dolan believes in him. He's the president and GM of that team. He's basically the top voice at the top of their hockey department. And this is a mandate from ownership to continue doing what he's doing. And what's he been doing? If you zoom out far enough, he's been turning over this team. Now, I can understand why people are criticizing the results. They were the President's Trophy winner that missed the playoffs the following season. That can be a difficult thing to do, and it certainly wasn't anyone's intention when the year began for them to finish in that position. So, getting that coaching hire right will be important. They've changed coaches a lot on Broadway, which I do think gets a little difficult, especially with some players who've been there a long time. It just feels like this again. And so how do you do something that I guess creates the necessary effect you want? What did the Rangers not do well, even in their President's Trophy winning season, though? They were not a stout defensive team. They were not a structured team. They relied a lot on Igor Shesterkin, and he can shoulder that load. They won a lot of games playing in that certain way. But I think that they're going to opt for more of a structured environment with the next coaching staff. And, they also let Phil Housley go. I mean, there could be changes here, not just in the head coaching job. You might be looking at either an entirely new staff or a partially new staff, depending on how those sets of hires go. So that's what I would look for. I know a lot of people said, hey, would it make sense for Mike Sullivan to go there? I mean, I don't know how that will land just yet, but, I know for sure that they're going to want to see a change in the way the team plays and performs and, be a little more predictable in the good way with how they play.
John Tortorella?
What are you starting?
No, I'm not starting. No. I just threw the name out there. If it's not him, it's not him. It's not him. It's not him. It's all good.
Well, I'm not saying it's not him. I don't know if it's him, but I would be surprised. But look at lots of coaches have gone home. We live in a world where Lindy Ruff is back behind the Sabres bench. You see Claude Julian, or it's happened where coaches get 2 tenures in one place, and obviously. With Tortorella, I think that there's a lot of affinity within the Rangers organization for him. They had a lot of success in his years as their head coach. Don't know if he's inclined to do that, but you've had crazier ideas. I just feel like you're trying to catch me saying too much.
No, I'm not trying. Look, I'm not trying to bait you, sir. I'm not trying to bait you at all. We're not in the business of baiting here. on the Chris Johnston show, despite what other people may think. You were not in the business of baiting. Just throwing a name out there.
All right. I love that.
What did you think out of Boston on Wednesday? The expectation for the Bruins, obviously, they want to be competitive. They still have some pieces on that team that could help them be competitive, in guys like Charlie McAvoy, David Pastrnak, Jeremy Swayman, and the like. What did you think of how they handled their exit interviews with the GM and Cam Neely yesterday?
Well, I would say fascinating messaging is the way I'd put it, because on one hand, you started something, I won't say it's a rebuild, but obviously you're refreshing the team. You trade Charlie Coyle, Brad Marchand, Brandon Carlo, guys that have been part of a lot of winning in Boston and been part of the culture of that team. And in all those cases, they did get some players. They got Casey Middlestat back in the Coyle deal from Colorado. They got players even like Fraser Minton in the Carlo deal with Toronto, who's played some games for them this season and is poised to quickly be an NHLer versus just straight up draft capital. But a youth movement is on. And yet at the same time, they have this press conference where Cam Neely acknowledges that Don Sweeney's contract is 1 year remaining on it and that he's got to make a decision on is he getting an extension? And you also have people at that press conference saying, I think this time next year we'll be playing playoff games. So, you've gone through this window where they did the necessary selling they felt at the trade deadline, but they're now signaling that they're going to do some buying. And that could be in free agency, of course. Maybe there's trades out there that are adding more to the team now, but they kind of took a posture as though they're going to be aggressive. And so I thought that was really interesting. I would say just a little surprised, not necessarily that they feel those things, that they're communicating those things, right? That's something they're telling their customers, their fan base. And, internally, it wouldn't have surprised me if there's meetings like, hey, maybe if this goes right, we can be right back in the playoffs. But it seems to me they've almost established that now as an expectation. And you've still got a GM who, at least as of this moment, doesn't have a whole lot of job security. Don Sweeney's been there a long time. So, I think that it makes him a more sort of notable team for me to watch entering the offseason than I might have thought. I might have thought there would be a bit more patience with the process that's just been started. But, Boston's not a patient town. It's a place that pro sports teams have done a lot of winning for a long time. And, you get the sense even with the upper management and ownership of this team, they're not patient, right? My image forever is of like Cam Neely watching a playoff game, and I could be anyone. I'm not referencing a specific one, like throwing his water bottle in disgust. And it's a passionate place. It's a place where they like a certain style, and the fact that they're telling everyone that they expect to be good again next year puts a lot of heat on the next few months to turn things over, because they need forwards to begin with. I think they need a little bit of everything, but they need more pop in that top six. David Pastrnak had a great year this year, and they finished like fifth last in the league. So you can have one star and one superstar or a couple superstars, but they need a lot more than what they got today.
106 points for David Pastrnak, the next closest forward to end the season for Boston. Morgan Geekie, 57 points. That's a significant drop off. That's not good enough for this Boston Bruins team with the standard that they've set for themselves. Remains to be seen if they're back in the playoffs next year. But I think after a year like that, I can understand why you have a bad taste in your mouth.
Yeah, that might have been good enough to earn Pastrnak some Hart Trophy votes.
Yeah.
Just saying, not saying. But,
I agree with you.
But he, that's player adjudged to be most valuable to his team. The case is pretty clear there. I think, look, it's never really boring in Boston. Nothing about this season was boring. I know it was difficult for their fan base, but it was pretty loud and proud there. And I think it's going to be more of the same. I think they're going to be big game hunting to the degree they can on July 1st. And if the free agent market even dries up more than it already has with more players signing before July 1st, they're going to have to go find some trades. And it's a GM who has been active a lot during his tenure as their GM, but he's kind of managing for his job right now. That's what it sounds like.
Absolutely. One more thing before we get to stick taps. I have two quotes in front of me from exit interviews around the league, and you got to tell me which one of these quotes makes your eyebrows perk up the most, or which one makes you go like, whoa, the most. Is it this one from Dylan Larkin of the Detroit Red Wings? We didn't gain any momentum from the trade deadline, and guys were kind of down about it, so it'd be nice to add something and bring a little bit of a spark on the ice and a morale boost as well? Or Kyle Dubas in Pittsburgh, you can go into the mass teardown rebuild and hope you get lucky with the lottery and hope that all this happens. But you can hope in one hand and shit in the other and see which one fills up first.
I hadn't heard that Dubas quote. I thought you were going to give, when you said Dubas, I thought you were going to rhyme off the quote that he said about Erik Karlsson.
That too. That was another big one. With,
probably my eyebrows probably perked up the most with Larkin, only because, while he's been in Detroit for a long time, he's a captain of the team, very well-spoken guy. He's a player still at the end of the day. Now, he's an important player to the organization. He's got a long-term contract. I'm not saying he doesn't have a voice in what happens, but the fact he used that voice in the way he did, that's what made my eyes perk up. I mean, Kyle Dubas is the president of the Pittsburgh Penguins. And he's, if you've paid attention closely to what's going on in Pittsburgh or, really looked at their moves, what he said, what he's done matches with what he said, even as crude as that quote was. But, he clearly does not want to go to the bottom of the league. And I think he thinks it's a fool's errand to do so. But I would have said that even without that quote. Whereas the fact that Larkin said that publicly is interesting. It comes at a time when Steve Yzerman's job is being discussed at least a little bit. I really think Detroit is a team to circle 3 times and underline in red when we talk about teams that could go do something big in free agency. I really believe there's that desire internally there to do it. So maybe that's how Dylan's prayers will be answered. You can't go back in time and make a big deal on March 7th, but on July 1st, maybe the Red Wings will be landing a big catch.
For those who don't want to be left in the dark about what Kyle Dubas said about Erik Karlsson, I'll read the quote quickly here. Erik is and will forever be a polarizing figure. My view would be we expect him to be one of the people who pulls us from where we're at into contention. I had a long meeting with him. My push would be his actions have to match his ambitions. He showed throughout the year he has another level to him.
He's saying it all. They expect more preparation, more commitment. I mean, you can't say it any more plain than that.
Absolutely.
He's getting paid big money. He's got a big resume, and they're expecting bigger results. And they feel that he could be putting more work into getting those results. That's what he's saying.
Man, the Pittsburgh Penguins, a team never boring, particularly in the Kyle Dubas era. Do you have a stick tap before we wrap this baby up?
I will give it to Lou Lamoriello, and I'll do it in this way. There's a lot of talk about this guy over the years, right? No facial hair. I mean, I couldn't play for him based on this beard I got going here. You got to wear white dress shirts if you play for him. There's all these sort of rules. And look, I don't agree with all those rules. I think some of them were silly. And he was almost infamous for not wanting any information out there about his team or discuss anything publicly in too great a format. He was infamous as well for intimidating other teams and agents from leaking that kind of info because of, what they might hear from him. But I do want to underline to have the level of professional discipline, the stamina to work in this industry as long as he did it's really something impressive. And what can I say that is more important than the achievements that he has with all those cups and a spot in the Hockey Hall of Fame and this and that. But I just think it would be a shame if we let his retirement pass without at least acknowledging anyone who does anything at the highest level into their 80s is a pretty incredible person who's achieved something that's impressive. And Lou Lamoriello did it his way, that whole way. It worked for a long, long, long time. A lot of people in this league swear by him. And with good reason. And to be honest, I've had nothing but great professional interactions with him over a long time myself. So yes, he might not play the scoop game, but he was always a gentleman to deal with. And I wish him well here in retirement.
Okay. I like that as a stick tap, CJ. For me, I think I'm going to give it to Alexander Ovechkin. how is it that we've reached this point in his Hall of Fame career? He's already established himself as the greatest goal scorer this league has ever seen, but it only came on Monday night where he scored his first ever playoff overtime goal. Like, I'm sure if you've done the overtime Butchergross challenge, his name has come up dozens of times from fans, hundreds of times from fans, thousands even, thinking, okay, Alexander Ovechkin, this will be the time he'll end it and win it for his team. The fact that it came so late in his career, just still very surprised about that. But hey, he did it. He found a way to do it. Nothing more we could really say about his on-ice legacy that hasn't already been said. Just kind of cool that it got to this point. That's kind of wild. He broke a long-standing goal-scoring record before scoring his first ever playoff overtime winner. Now he can retire, clearly. So I'll give it to Alexander.
He had 2 goals in that game. I mean, it just feels like he's having a moment here. Like, this year is kind of him. Other than the broken leg, which, it shouldn't be glossed over, like, it just feels like everything has gone his way this season. I mean, I wonder if maybe there's a long run in those Capitals legs and he'll be part of it. We'll have to watch.
We'll see. In the meantime, we'll continue to enjoy the Stanley Cup playoffs and look ahead again to Game 3 between the Sens and Maple Leafs at the Canadian Tire Center. Looking forward to seeing you in the press box tonight, buddy. It's going to be very fun. In the meantime, for everyone else, get your questions in for the next Ask CJ. We'll get to questions on our next episode. And if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, wait a minute, what?
Important info. Is there hot dogs still in that press box?
More often than not, yes. Sometimes they like to mix it up and have different food at intermission, but
would you say, is it a hot dog, yay or nay, if you're me on this night?
Ooh, I would say yeah. If I were to put money, I would say there's going to be hot dogs. I don't see them getting too fancy with it. What I would also tell you, and I'm sure you have the experience with this, you got to get early for those dogs. Those dogs leave. Especially it's with the contingent of Toronto people who will be in attendance and the overflow in the press box. Those might be gone before the first intermission even begins.
Maybe because we're so close to Parliament Hill, I'm going to have my elbows up.
I like that. I like
that. Play on the moment. That's a joke of the moment.
I actually really like that. That's a really good pun. I think we could end it there. Thanks so much for tapping it, guys.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.